How good are the different spell effects in Oblivion Remastered Master Mode? I'm going to be ranking all of the effects for Master Mode for custom spell making. So we are assuming we are trying to min-max our character, use restoration to the fullest potential possible, and run things like ramp, run things like optimal builds, and so on. We're not really considering default spells you can buy from bartering and from the spell sellers. We're looking at custom spells and how good these effects are. So to begin, we have Absorb Attribute. So essentially what this allows you to do is to temporarily reduce an enemy's attribute while increasing your own, and it is more expensive than Fortify Attribute. And also, if you want this effect to last for a long period of time, you have to stay within range, as is the case with all Absorb effects. So because it's so circumstantial and weird, I'm going to say it's very bad or very situational. So D tier. I don't think it's really worth running. I think there are much better options, like Fortify Attribute basically does the same thing, but for cheaper, and you don't need a target. You don't have to be close to that target. So it's just objectively worse than a different thing in the same skill tree. Next, we have Absorb Skill. So Absorb Skill, very similar to Fortify Skill. It costs more though, so like you can reduce an enemy's damage output if it's a human by, for example, absorbing Blade. So in a way it kind of functions as like shutdown, and weirdly you can absorb skills from things that shouldn't have them. For example, a zombie, it actually says that on the wiki article here. If you absorb a zombie, it actually allows you to, siphon mercantile off of it, which these are just weird effects. Honestly, I think Absorb Skill is kind of the same. Too situational and weird, very expensive. Best case scenario, it's slightly reducing the damage something is dealing. The next thing we have is Absorb Fatigue. It's actually just the order there. So Absorb Fatigue actually is pretty decent because absorbing fatigue allows you to knock things over when their fatigue hits 0 while also giving you fatigue. Now, when you get a bunch of fatigue, it doesn't really matter because power attacks don't really do that much damage in this game, and it's mostly all about enchanted weapons. So in that way, like the resource you're gaining back is not super valuable, but the fact that it can knock things over, I would say puts it in A tier. Damage Fatigue is a cheaper effect in Destruction, and also Destruction has ramp. You can ramp Absorb Fatigue, but the fact that you're siphoning fatigue doesn't really matter unless you're doing like some kind of challenge run, or you're just restricting mechanics and just not allowing yourself to use like crazy enchanted weapons. So it's just a decent effect that's quite strong for its shutdown in restoration, at least. Like obviously there's better ways to get the knockdown from draining fatigue. Next is Absorb Health. Absorb Health I would say is low A tier. Absorb Fatigue, actually I'm gonna put it in B tier. So Absorb Fatigue is nice because it can shut things down and it's a little bit cheaper than Absorb Health, and you can kind of add it to things for shutdown. But obviously Damage Fatigue is better, and Absorb Health is kind of the same story where if you want to kill something, Destruction is the way to do it. Like if you want to kill through magic, you don't want to absorb health. It's a very expensive effect. The base cost is 16, which is quite high. And generally, the healing it provides is not really that good. You can ramp it, and when it's ramped, it's okay, but it's not like killing quickly or nuking down enemies in a way that's, big value. It's just kind of okay. It's like good. I know the C tier literally says okay, but it's about like B tier quality. Absorb Magicka could be overpowered. So it's at least A tier. But if you temporarily give an enemy Magicka, like if you fortify their Magicka, you can siphon that fortified Magicka off of them. So if you try to siphon Magicka off of enemies that are empty or at low or no Magicka, you basically won't get anything. But if you absorb Magicka from an enemy you've given Magicka to, you can then steal that. So you can give something like Fortify Magicka, 50 for 2 seconds or whatever, and then absorb 50 Magicka, or 25 Magicka times, 2 over 2 seconds, so 50 absorbed. And you can also ramp it, so in the case of shutting enemies down, it's kind of valuable, but potentially it has overpowered use case where you can just keep profiting Magicka, assuming that you fortify an enemy, so that way every single enemy has Magicka to steal. The cost of it is profitable, so like the amount of Magicka you get in return for casting it is going to be more than what it costs for the most part, as long as there's Magicka to absorb. But with ramp, it absorbs more than it should. It ends up getting you a ton of Magicka back while also draining enemies, which could shut them down indirectly. So these two effects are more powerful than Absorb Health because absorbing Magicka is more valuable than gaining health back. assuming you're running some kind of magical build or like a spell tank or something. And Absorb Fatigue is also valuable because it can knock things over. Next, we have Cure Disease. Cure Disease, I would say, is B tier, but it is like situational. You only use it to remove diseases from yourself. That's it. It doesn't do anything else. It doesn't do anything special. You don't even need to make a custom spell for this. You just, have it in your inventory for when you get diseased occasionally. Cleanse that disease, continue playing. Nothing too crazy. The base cost is insane, but it's not as much. Like when you actually have restoration level, it doesn't cost 1,400. All right, the next is Cure Paralysis. So Cure Paralysis is pretty interesting in that if there is an ally that is paralyzed, you can remove it from them, but you can actually not remove it from yourself because you can't cast spells and you're paralyzed. So this is a good effect for a potion, but not a good effect for anything else. So for that reason, I don't think it's very good. It's very situational. The only time you'd be removing paralyze from someone would be like an ally, maybe a follower or a summon or something. And if it's a summon, you might as well just resummon the damn thing. It's probably faster and cheaper than like opening. Like I highly doubt you have this hotkeyed. So if that's the case, just do that. But also most paralyzes are pretty short. So probably you don't even need to worry about this. Like if it's, an essential follower that's knocked over or whatever, they'll probably stand up in a second anyways. So it's not very useful, and you can't use it on yourself. Cure Poison, I would say, is C tier. It's a little bit better. You can actually remove poisons from yourself, which is kind of nice. So certain poisons can be a problem, especially ones that apply like a silence effect or something like that. But you'd be surprised at how many things seem like they're poisons but are actually abilities. So, for example, the bugs in Shivering Isles use a lesser power on you that applies a damage spell effect, but it is not a poison. I know that because I tried curing it with Cure Poison and it didn't work. Maybe there is, I think you have to use Dispel to remove it. But either way, it doesn't seem to be as effective as you'd think. And it's just generally, situational for removing random poisons at times. Next, we have Fortify Attribute. So this is actually very strong. This is high S tier. All I have to say is Fortify Willpower for mana ramping. That's it. There's other use cases too, but they're probably not as good as that. Very strong effect, leads to basically breaking the game with regen without using any items. So just by having restoration plus destruction, you're just going to be overpowered pretty easily, pretty consistently. Next we have Fortify Fatigue. Fortify Fatigue used to be good. It used to be good because Fatigue used to ramp melee damage. I don't know why they removed that from the game. It's actually a good thing because it allows melee builds to do something different and go for getting huge amounts of fatigue, running Fortify Fatigue on like their armor, and then getting big physical damage. And I feel like that removed an entire aspect of the game, like that change in the remaster. This is why I think dagger switching is fine on bow attacks, because they removed Fortify Fatigue. We need something. We need something for physical to shine, right? But I think it's just like C tier for now. You use it just to give yourself more fatigue. It's really nothing too crazy. It's a relatively cheap effect. If you find that you're running out of fatigue often, maybe it's a nice effect to have. I don't really use it. I haven't really seen people using it. I'm not aware of any like big use cases that justify running this. So I think it's just fine. Next, we have Fortify Health. So Fortify Health, similar to Fortify Fatigue. I mean, it can be nice for like a tank build if you want to get more max health, but the best thing to have is like armor cap plus reflect melee, like reflect damage, armor cap plus resist normal weapons. Those two effects allow you to tank beyond the 85 armor cap, so that's better than having more health. So I'd rather optimize for those effects and just get that on like enchanted gear or something. But Fortify Health, I would say, is also situational. You could argue more health is better, but taking less damage is better than having more health. Because when you lose health, you have to restore it. Whereas if you just take less damage before you get hit, you have to restore less health anyways. And this honestly just seems like an effect that doesn't really do much. I mean, obviously it gives you more health, but you're better off just tanking more if you're trying to not die, or just casting invisibility. Next we have Fortify Magicka. Fortify Magicka is arguably S tier. Getting more Magicka in addition to more willpower, this is like a common thing people do. You can use both of these to then cast super expensive spells that give you 100 willpower for 120 seconds. And as you keep giving yourself 100 willpower for 120 seconds, like multiple instances of it, your mana regen just becomes absolutely broken, and you just regenerate like 20 to 50 magicka per second, which is insane, and easily just beats the game just in of itself. So definitely one of the better effects for general play. You can also just make like a Fortify Magicka 100 for 120 seconds for relatively cheap, and just use that to have passive increased mana pool, so that when you're out of combat, your mana regens faster. So you can just have that as more mana base, so that when you win a fight and your mana regens faster, you just have a bigger pool for the next fight. Obviously, if you combine it with ramping, that's where you get like the huge value and it's like broken, but it's just pretty strong like outside of that. Next, we have Fortify Skill. Fortify Skill is definitely A tier. Now, it's only A tier because it only is relevant for when that skill is not at 100. Fortifying skills above 100, for the most part, doesn't do anything. I think certain skills, it still does some things. Like I think Fortifying Acrobatics, you continue to jump higher. Fortifying Athletics, you continue to run faster. But Fortifying like Destruction above 100 does nothing, and so on. So all the major skills that you would want to like, Fortify Blade to 200 to get more damage, it doesn't do that. But however, what you can do is Fortify Destruction early. So like, let's say you're 50 Destruction and you're in the early game or the middle game, you can do Fortify Destruction 50, get to 100 Destruction early, reduce your magic costs for all your Destruction spells, cast higher cost spells, and then power level even faster while playing the game, and also cast higher level spells for cheaper. So it does allow you to kind of bypass Magicka cost, which is a big issue for early to middle game. One of the biggest problems most magical builds have in early game is just like getting good spells from spell making. So you need to get startup cash, you need to get all the spell effects you need to make the custom spell effects, you need to grind out your levels, and getting through that, like once you get through that, then your build's like overpowered. But before then, it's nice to have something to bridge the gap, especially if you don't want to just sit there and grind out magic levels, if you want to actually like level through playing the game. So this allows you to do that. It's also good for like Fortify Armor, Fortify Mercantile, things like this. Really good utility. Fortify Armor is nice because you can just do Fortify Armor by like 80, because usually your armor is around like 20 anyways. And as long as you're at 100 armor, your hammers are invincible. So you can have like a single hammer. So Fortify Armor by like 100% or whatever, 100 points for 3 seconds, 2 seconds. Very cheap to cast. Allows you to repair all of your stuff and have like one repair hammer. It also allows you to power level it too. So very huge value. Same thing with Mercantile, same thing with other effects. So really, really good utility for combat, out of combat, just great overall. Really strong. Next we have Restore Health. I think Restore Health is middle of A tier. I think that's fair for it. It's really strong. It's a really consistent, reliable way to heal yourself. If you run out of potions that heal you and you're an alchemy build, you always have Restore Health. You can always heal yourself. There's also powerful effects through custom spell making, where you just run like heal over time. So if you're like a tank build, or if you're a warrior or something, or if you just want like a solid heal spell, you can customize exactly how much health you need and over what time duration. Heal over time costs less magicka than burst heal, so usually you want to run heal over time unless you really need to run burst heal. But if you're running burst heal, you're probably not tanking well, and if you're not tanking well, there's like things you can address with your build so that you can tank well. So that way the heal over time is arguably like the best thing in terms of efficiency. The other nice thing is if you cast like a 10, 15, or 20 second heal, you don't have to keep recasting. So if you keep recasting, every time you recast, you interrupt mana regen, which you don't really want to do. So that can be nice. Next we have Restore Fatigue. Restore Fatigue, I would say, is like honestly high C tier. So like Absorb Fatigue is better than Restore because Absorb can knock enemies over, but Restore Fatigue, the only thing it's really getting you is like sprinting, jumping, power attacks, and Shield Bash, but Shield Bash can be used at low stamina. So really it's just giving you more power attacks, which can be useful if you're doing like a restricted run, or you're going for, a run where you're not using certain things, like maybe you're doing like magicless in terms of like offensive magic, like you're allowing restoration, but you've like banned destruction, or you just don't want to run destruction or something like that. Can be really good for fueling power attacks, but power attacks are just like decent in this game. They're good enough to beat Master Mode with, but they're not optimal, and overall they're just fine. Next we have Restore Attribute. So Restore Attribute, I would say, is also like C tier. It's nice to have for when enemies damage attributes, but outside of that, it largely does nothing. So for the most part, if you get diseased, if you cleanse the disease, that will remove the debuffs the disease provides. But sometimes enemies use abilities, effects, poisons, and so on that will damage your attributes, and you can usually have them restored at the altars in temples, in the cathedrals. However, sometimes you're out in the field, you don't feel like traveling back to town, whatever. You can just make a custom spell that restores all attributes by like 5 to 10 points and then just spam it to get your attributes back up. And then finally, we have Resist Magic. So Resist Magic as a spell is decent for patching up magic resist, but overall, this is something you really want as like Breton racial, Orc racial, Lord Sign, Mundane Ring, through equipment, through racial passives and equipment, more so than through, you know, actually casting it, because it is somewhat expensive to cast and maintain. So if you want to give yourself like 100 magic resist for, you know, 30 seconds or something, or whatever value you need, that can be quite expensive, and it can kind of interrupt the flow of combat. Usually you're better off just getting resist magic through effects, but it's still a strong effect. I'm going to put it in B tier. You could argue it's like A or S tier, but usually, like, I agree that it is A or S tier in terms of strength, in terms of what it does and provides, but as like an enchantment or a racial passive rather than an active thing you're casting. Same thing with like Spell Reflect. Like Spell Reflect is decent. It's really strong. But if you have it through your gear, it's really good. But if you have it through casting a spell, it's extremely expensive to cast for a long period of time. Like if you want to make like 100% Spell Reflect for 30 seconds, that's like 150 Magicka or something ridiculous, maybe even more. So here's where I think all the spells are for custom spells. Definitely drop a comment as to why any of these should move up or down based on how strong they are. In terms of like master mode and like what you found them to be, I am curious to see if any of these are actually like overpowered or underpowered based on what people have been finding. And that is it for this one. Definitely like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.